Hi, hope you're alive and breathing. Let's cut the chit chat and get straight into it. So I'm going to walk you through a mix that I did of a song I wrote called Blues Train. This is the live version that myself and my band recorded one day before the UK went into lockdown. So that was pretty lucky, in the Gate in Cardiff. So the first thing I will do whenever I am doing a mix is I will make buses. I will group every instrument, because obviously if you've got kick mic, snare mics, they're all part of drums, so you'll want to group them. So the first thing I do is I'll hit X if you're on Logic, and then I will route where it says output, and I'll choose drums. Well, it'll be called bus 1, but then you label it drums, and then do the same thing for all the other instruments. So bass, if you've got more than one signal being recorded from bass, so anything from there, that's all bass. Group that to bass, guitars, etc. Do the same with effects. So that helps you to level things out as well. So say if just drums in general are too loud or too quiet, you can just move them up with one fader rather than having to move every individual one. Cool. So I'll walk you through how I started out with drums. Just hit solo on the drum bus. Cool. So I use two mics on the drum, kick drum rather. I used a D12, AKG D12, and a SEV kick. And here's the dry sample I use from the kick. And here's with the processing that I've done, and I'll walk you through what I've done. A lot more air, a lot more punch to it. So I used an API 560 EQ. I've added a boatload of 16K. I've cut out, I almost always do this with kick drums. I'll always cut out a bit of 500 just because it's a bit of like a flabby area, if that's a word, in the kick drum, which I generally don't like, so I'll get rid of it. And I've also taken away a lot of sub, which is unusual, but the reason for doing this is that my second kick mic is packing all the punch with the sub. So rather than having two kick drum samples that are competing for the same space, you just want to limit it. So whichever one you think has the nicest sub punch to it, I would use that and then just maybe get rid of it on the rest of it. And so here's my other kick mic combined. So this is actually just the original kick, the V kick, so I have no samples on this one. So as you can hear, it's got a lot of punch. And the way I got this punch is mainly by EQ. And this Secret Weapon plugin, again, which is kind of EQ. The Brainworks subfilter, I believe it's free. You can get this. The API thing isn't free, but the subfilter is. And I've picked a frequency that I want to really hit home, and that's 33 Hertz, which is not far off what I've boosted on the API. And I've just, made it slap. Okay, cool. Snare, the most important part of my record. So I've used two mics on the snare, and I duplicated the snare signal and made a third kind of sample thing. So with Trigger, you have the option of using the mix knob. So this is a mixture of the sample plus the original. And I kind of like to have a little bit of the original in there, because unless I just totally hate the original sound, which is unlikely because I would like to make it sound good. But here is the snare top. I've used a mixture of different samples. So I've used a Ludwig brass snare, loads of different types of snares on here. Just get Slate Trigger, it's like 50 quid. It's really good. Great sounding drums. Here's the processing that I've done to the snare. So I have added some 3.2K and a little bit of 10K to give it a bit more snap, and then like the shininess on the top. And then I have used a leveling amplifier in limit mode, just to kind of control things a little bit. So you can see it's not moving very much. Literally half a dB, but it's just when it gets more dynamic later on in the song, it just controls the peaks a little bit for me. And this is where the main bulk of the snare sound is coming from. And so I'll turn it off. And I'm dirtying it up quite a lot with this. This is like tube distortion. Really makes this sound just dirty. I've used that plugin a lot. Here's the snare bottom. Again, I've used Trigger. I've used an 1176 compressor, which is doing very little, but just controlling the peaks. Some EQ, which you can see what I've done there. Bit of 200, bit of 400, bit of 2.5K. 11k for some attack and punch, and then a little bit of shelved 11k for some shininess. And here's the toms. They sound very nice. Here's the overheads. I used Neumann KM184s. I've taken out a fair bit. They kind of sound a little bit like muffled. I've taken out a fair bit of high end just because the cymbal bleed was so bad. In future, I would have moved the mics further away from the cymbals just because I had some hench cymbal bleed. And then there was a room mic at the back of the room which is picking up everything. So a lot of the drum sound is coming from what I've been doing to the drum bus. So I'm saying I bust everything to the drum bus. So anything from kick to room, I have bust to this drum bus here. And there's a lot of processing going on this, which is where I do most of the shaping of the drums. So I have there's a little bit of compression going on here just to tame stuff. And then I have one of my favorite compressors, where I used actually a preset that was already on there, but I really liked how it sounded. It's the Manley variable MU compressor. And it's just such a nice, smooth sounding compressor. Again, there's a lot of little bits of compression that's going on. And if I turn all the compressors and everything that all the treatment that I've done to the drum bus, there's a huge difference. With it on, I'm going to say that 90% of the work is in the drum bus. I then used an API 2500 compressor. This is like my main go-to drum compressor for making things just snap. I turn it off. On. It's snappy. If you like snappy, punchy drums, I use that. I like it. You should use it too. There's a UAD version, there's a Waves version. The Waves version has a sale on at the moment. I'm pretty sure it's like $50, maybe cheaper. In fact, no, it's a bundle that has it in it that's $50. Go get it. Good. Yeah, so that's drums. One thing I have done is that I've made another channel. What I've done is I sent the drum bus using the bus sends here to another channel called Crush Drums. And what I've done is crush the drums because I'm sending the original drum signal to this channel and then just destroying it using this thing called Devil Lock. As you can see in the title, it does say Audio Level Destroyer, and that's exactly what it does. So here is just the crushed drums, and what it is doing is kind of adding some sustain to the drums. You'll hear what it does. Kind of give it like a pumping effect. Yeah, I love what that does. Let's move on to bass. Bass has got a hell of a lot going on. So what I did with the bass is I've just recorded one DI from the bass, and then I've just duplicated the channel, and I've done a lot with them. So here's the DI channel. I put the DI through a bass amp simulator. So this is the bass DI. You can see what I've done on my settings there. I've boosted the treble, give it some mid-range, and I've cut some bass because it was pretty hefty down there. I don't need that much down there. And then I have done, sorry to all bassists now, I've just completely destroyed the bass signal, but this requires a huge sound for the bass. So I'm just going to show you what the bass sounds like with all my layers that I've put on. Absolutely massive. I use this plugin all the time. This is called iZotope Trash. Again, I think it's a relatively cheap plugin, maybe 30 quid I picked up on a sale maybe. Similar to what that Devil Lock plugin was doing earlier, just destroying audio and making it sound just huge and filthy and dirty and disgusting, which is what we like. So I've used two different bass crunch. In fact, I've used like 3 different bass crunches. So here's the first bass crunch that I used. Absolutely massive. Second one. And then in the choruses, I've done a left and right. Again, this is all one take that the bassist, my bassist Josh, has done. But I just duplicated the take, moved it ever so slightly to the left, and the other one ever so slightly to the right. And I detuned one ever so slightly by like 2 or 3 cents, which isn't much. It's not like it's not even pushing close to a semitone or anything like that. So it doesn't phase. Cool. And then in the choruses, I throw the same one left and right to give it some space, which gives you a gigantic bass sound of this. Just ridiculously big. Okay, so that was my bass sound, which is absolutely outrageous. Next, we move on to guitars. So here's my guitar, which is basically I took a DI from when I was playing. Took this through STL Tone Hub, which is my new favorite guitar plugin. I bought Ramesh Dodengoda's pack. He's a guy from Cardiff. He's a producer, very, very cool guy. He's made his own presets on here using all of his insanely expensive gear that he's bought. So saving you the trouble and the money. And I really, really liked his AC30 presets. And I used that left and right. And here's how my guitars sound. Cool. So again, like I said, I've just thrown them left and right, moved them ever so slightly to the left and the right so they don't phase. And then I've not done an awful lot to the original channels. But again, I've got a lot of the stuff going on Tom Electric Guitar Bus. So what I've done on the bus is I've done some EQ. So I have boosted a little bit of 4K and that's it on this bit. I've used a C6, which is a multi-band compressor, to tame some of the low end. So rather than actually EQing it out, I use this. So when it hits a threshold, it hits a certain point, then it ducks down rather than ducking it down altogether, because I might like the low end in a lot of the guitar for most of it, but there's only certain bits where it's too much. So rather than cutting it out completely, I'll use that and just it ducks down in certain areas. I've used some Brainworks EQ. I've added a bit of 3K. I've taken a bit of 1K away, and a little bit of like 6.5K, just to give it some shine back on the top. And then I've used this compressor just to tame things a little bit. It's not doing much. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. It's really not compressing it an awful lot. Final bit of EQ, I've just added a bit of 4K, which is like, if you want to get really, really snappy, attack-driven guitars, adding a fair bit of 4K is a good way to go. Cool, so that's my guitars. Then I've taken the live feed from Dan, my lead guitarist, and here's what his guitar sounds like. As you can hear, there's a lot of drum bleed because obviously it's using the mic, and the mic is in the same room as the drum, so you'll hear a lot of that. So I've not done an awful lot to his. I've used the API 560 EQ just to taking away some 500, a little bit of 8K, a little bit of 4K, and that's kind of it. I've added a fair bit of 4K on here, again, just making it really snappy. Cool. Then let's move on to vocals. So I've bounced the vocal in place after I gated it. So again, because of the fact that there's drums and they're pretty loud, I gated the vocals so that whenever the drums were coming up, it would kind of not allow them to come through as much. So you'll hear at the end of phrases, like you won't hear the drum bleed on my vocal mic. Train, honey. Because I've gated it, and just the reverb tails after it, which makes it a lot more treatable because it's a live situation. So here's what I've done with my vocal. So I use this plugin called Manny Triple D, which is a great name for a plugin. And it basically targets the problem areas of the voice. Here's the frequency that I'm getting rid of, which is called the D-Boxy frequency. It's basically like around 200 hertz to 400 hertz. Again, it's like a dynamic EQ, so it's not cutting it completely, it's just getting rid of it once it hits a threshold, and you use this. And then next I've got some EQ. A bit of 1K, a bit of 12K, and that's it. Then I've got an 1176 doing some compression here. I'll see how much it's doing. A fair bit. About 3 dB, and then peaking at like say 7 when it hits like a harsh S or a harsh T or something like that. I like this style of compressor. It makes my voice sound good. I like it. And then I'm just controlling the peaks a little bit with this limiting leveling amplifier. Then another 11 to 76, which is just catching some extra peaks that maybe the other ones didn't catch. And then we move on to saturation. So I've used the Twin Tube processor from Plugin Alliance. I think you might be able to grab a free copy of this. I could be lying. And then I'm using some dynamic EQ just to tame the S's in about the 8K area. So just a little bit of saturation coming from this plugin. I'm using another de-esser. Then I've got the RVox, which is doing a little bit of compression to make it sit on top of the mix a little bit more. So let's move on to Dan's vocals, Dan and backing vocals. I've done a similar thing to the way I've processed mine. So just taming the frequencies using this Manny M Triple D plugin. Then some compression. I really like this compression for male vocals. Then I got another 1176 just catching the peaks. Then an SSL comp just smoothing things over. You can see my settings there if you want to copy them. Go for it. Some EQ. Okay, so after all that bus processing, the one thing I'll then do before I finish the mix, output processing, my mix sounds like without all my mix bus processing going on. And with. Again, a lot of heavy lifting being done here. So here's what I'm doing. I'm adding a shelf of almost 3 dB of 18K just to the whole mix, just so it sounds a bit brighter. I use this compressor, the Manley compressor, just to tame things and make sure that it's not peaking at all. It just gives it a bit of glue. I think that's the best way I can describe it. And then I've used this on a mix bus. This sounds insane. So I mentioned this, I use this on my snare to give it like a bit more of like dirt, but you're just using it as like a subtle effect. It's like a saturate, just to get a bit more color out of all the instruments. Really great plugin. Any saturate will do the same sort of thing. And then I've used an ozone imager. This is free. This is great. I put this on every mix I ever do. It just makes things sound a bit wider, and wider is generally better. Again, this is a very brief walkthrough of how I mix this. If there's any questions, feel free to let me know. But if not, then yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and stay safe. If this helps you in any way, then great. Nice one.